It took me a while, but I finally realized what was wrong with women. Men are the problem, no doubt about it. Now as I sit here at this bus stop and smell the foul odor, I see all my mistakes and they are crystal clear in the rearview mirror of my mind. I have about an hour, so I can tell you about this segment of my life. My life is not going exactly as I had hoped. In fact, it's an absolute disaster right now. I've had to take a long hard look at how I live my life and how I treat people. But I'm still relatively young, so I can bounce back. My biggest mistake was believing that men would do the right thing. None of the men involved in my story did the right thing. In truth, my idea of the right thing to do is what is best for me, but I don't think any of them realized that. My other mistake was that I assumed that other women would also act according to the rules and principles that I thought made life orderly. The other woman in the story was not supposed to just come and take my toys before I was done playing with them. And now I'm facing an awkward bus ride back to my parents' house to try to rebuild my life in the hick town I was so eager to escape from. I'm sure when I get there, the tongues of those small towns will vibrate. It definitely won't be the triumphant return I expected, but that's not my fault. I am a victim of my upbringing. People are supposed to behave a certain way with me, and when they don't, I apparently don't make good decisions. Men have always said the same thing to me since I was a little girl. "Oh, Katie, you're beautiful. I'd do anything for you." They call me Katie because that's my name. I am an apple in a world of pears, and that makes me stand out. Anyway, my long, straight, naturally blonde hair and crystal clear blue eyes don't bother me much either. My dad always said that I was destined to accomplish great things and succeed in life. Throughout my entire life, there has only been one boy for me, Rafe Jenkins. He was the cutest boy in my school, and therefore in the whole town. I latched onto him in first grade and never let go. He wasn't as driven as I was, but he always played his part. When we got to high school and I became a cheerleader, he had to get on the football team or lose me. He didn't like football much, so I had to motivate him to excel. He was a running back, so I'd just tell him that when he got the ball that I'd stand under the goalposts, and anybody that stopped him from reaching me could take me out on a date. That lit a fire under him because Rafe loved me, and he hated sharing. By our senior year, Rafe had more touchdowns than any other player in the school's history. He probably could have gone to college on a football scholarship, but that wasn't in my plans. Right after graduation, we got married and moved to California. Rafe was a very good carpenter and got a lot of work around town so I could attend college. There I got an associate's degree in business and started working at a bank to gain experience. The first experience I had was that some of the people who worked at the bank spent more money in a week on lunch than we spent on rent. They wore nice clothes and drove expensive cars, not pickup trucks. In short, they lived the way I wanted them to live. I'd spent a lot of time in high school trying to get my image right and get rid of my southern accent, and now it was time to assert myself. Rafe started dropping me off a block from the bank in the morning and picking me up a block away. That way no one ever saw me get out of his old truck. Rafe was a good guy, and I loved him in my own way, but there was no way I wanted anyone to see me in that truck. One of the bank officers took a liking to me, and he started helping me become the man I wanted to be. I, in turn, helped him with a little problem he had whenever he was around me. I could barely even feel him when we were doing it, so I didn't consider it cheating. I knew Rafe didn't think so, so I tried to make sure he never found out about it. Anyway, he started introducing me to the right people, and eventually introduced me to Smith Benson. It was classy or what, but the man has 2 last names. Even his first name is a last name. Anyway, Smith, that's his first name, fell head over heels in love with me. He worked for an entertainment representation firm. They worked with all sorts of stars and athletes in different fields. I didn't care what field it was, as long as it didn't grow grain. Smith drove a silver BMW. It was the most beautiful car I'd ever seen. He got me a job as his assistant, no more days as a bank teller for me. From the beginning, I knew Smith was interested in me. After all, he was a man. I watched his attempts to get into my pants and realized that no matter how rich and powerful he was, or how I thought he was, I had power over him. For the first few weeks, I did things the business way. But I had to be careful because if I made him wait too long, he would replace me with someone who would give him what he wanted. I was going to give it to him too. I just wanted to get something in return. Every day, he took me to different fancy restaurants for lunch. He did my hair and even started buying me clothes and things. I explained to Rafe that Smith was just trying to make sure my clothes and manners didn't draw too much attention to me in the company we kept at work. Rafe, jealous boy that he was, threatened to kick Smith's ass if he so much as laid a finger on me. I think he followed us a couple times when we went to lunch, so I had to do something to get him out of our way. Rafe still didn't like the idea of sharing me with anyone else, but oh well. Smith and I were joined by one of his mystery clients, an artist from France who had big fans all over the world. She was coming to the United States for the first time to exhibit. She was going to spend a month here before the exhibition to finalize her new works. That gave us an opportunity and I said to Smith, "What are you thinking about, Kathleen?" He asked. "Where will Amanda be staying when she arrives?" I asked in response. "We've rented a studio apartment for her," he replied. "Do you have any carpentry work that needs to be done there?" I asked again. "Well, there are a few things that could be done." "Why?" he asked. "Because if you hire my husband, we'll know exactly where he is and when, and we can be together without worrying about him finding us and kicking your ass." Smith called Rafe and asked him to come over for a meeting in 2 days. They worked out the details, Smith gave Rafe the keys, and they shook hands as Rafe left. Smith then approached me and told me to pay him for hiring Rafe. I knew exactly what he wanted because his payments usually involved 2 of my friends, Nil and Bob. Everything had to be perfect. Smith rented us a room in a motel across town from the apartment complex where Rafe worked. What was Rafe doing near a motel? You can teach a puppy not to shit on carpets, but you can't teach a person to do anything. Rafe was driving by the motel because the motel was next to the only Burger Queen restaurant in town. When he saw Smith's BMW, he waited outside the motel and watched us get out. Of course, Smith and I didn't know Rafe had seen us, we thought we had gotten away with it. Smith was happy and I was disappointed, but happy too. I was disappointed because by this time I had cheated on Rafe with 2 city types. Rafe. I couldn't believe I saw Kathy walking out of the motel with that nasty boss of hers. I guess she was too fancy for me. She spent so much time with her big city associates that she became too sophisticated for a country boy. Oh well, if that's what she wants, let her have it. I won't stand in her way. I called my friend at home and he said I should call a lawyer about the divorce, which I did. It's going to be expensive, so I'll have to keep working. It's like that joke from the movie Dukes of Hazzard. Why are divorces so expensive? Because they're worth it. The attorney set up an appointment for me to meet with a private investigator to get evidence to support my claims. He also told me that since we had no children and we both worked, if I could prove infidelity, I wouldn't have to pay Katie any child support or alimony. That's exactly what I wanted. Just to be free of her. At the same time, I still loved her very much. I just couldn't imagine why she would do this to me. Yes, I could, why would I kid myself? Since first grade, Katie and I had both been in love with the same person, her. We always did what she wanted, only this time, I think what she wants she needs someone else to help her get. I went to the apartment I was supposed to be working at. I hoped it had a microwave so I could heat up food from Burger Queen. It should be an easy job, but it was time-consuming. I had to build a number of easels and stands in different rooms of the apartment, as well as several on the front deck. This was necessary so that the person who would be living here could paint or do anything else wherever they wanted. I also had to inspect the apartment and see if anything needed to be repaired. If I could make repairs, I was to make them and bill Sly Smith for the work. If the job was beyond my capabilities or comfort zone, I was to notify Smith to get it done before the customer arrived. As I opened the door, I noticed that it creaked and kind of jammed when I tried to open it. I would put that on the bill and charge Smith $50 for using WD-40. In the kitchen, among all the modern appliances, I found a microwave. It was a very nice one. While my burgers heated up, I sat down at the table in the breakfast nook. I started thinking about Katie again. There was no way I wanted to stay married to her. She was, as hard as I tried, even now I couldn't think of anything bad to call her. I guess I was set up differently. I was torn from my musings by some sound. I wasn't sure I heard it. Maybe I imagined it. But the sound was like someone very quietly walking up the back stairs, as if they were wearing only socks. I must have imagined it. I ate my burgers while the smell of charcoal grilled beef permeated the apartment. I measured all the exposed walls in the rooms I'd been told to put my easels in. In a couple of rooms, it seemed more sensible to put shelving in front of the walls. After taking all the measurements for the interior, I looked at the exterior. Here, too, I had an idea. I decided to build the easel inside the closet so that wind, rain, or dust wouldn't damage the paintings and everything else. After that, I cleaned myself up and headed home. Kathy was already there. She was wearing one of those tight, fitting night sets she liked to lounge around in. I remember she used to look just as good, if not better, in one of my old shirts or t-shirts. But now she was too sophisticated for that. She walked over to me, and I pretended to remove my tool belt as she reached out to hug me. "Rafe, have you eaten yet, hon?" I wondered why the hell she was asking me that. She doesn't know how to cook, and I couldn't smell any of the food she'd brought. And if I was hungry, would she just pull my dinner out of her ass? "Yeah," I said. "I got burgers." I guess I was hoping she'd remember that I only liked burgers at one place. She knew that although there was a McClowney's restaurant on every corner, I only liked Burger Queen. The only restaurant in town was right outside the motel where she spent part of her day. "Great," she said. "Maybe we can spend some time together then." I noticed two things right away. First, her fake city accent was gone, and she spoke like she did when we first came here 3 years ago. That meant she wanted something. Second, she smelled like she had just showered and cleaned herself up. I'm guessing to get rid of the evidence. She just had fun with old Sly Smith. Does she really need more than that? Or is this just her way of tricking me into thinking nothing is going on? I'm not as sophisticated as Kathy and Smith, but that doesn't mean I'm stupid. I could have gone to college. I had plenty of scholarship offers, and my grades were better than Katie's. But when we got here, I had to earn money so she could go to school. She walked to the bedroom door and just leaned against it. But I just played it cool. I spread my measurements out on the kitchen table and pretended to study them. "Honey, I have to make sure all my measurements are correct for this job," I said. "If I do anything wrong, it will reflect badly on you, on your boss. And we wouldn't want that, would we?" I asked. "I'll be right there," I said. She pouted, but went into the bedroom anyway. She wasn't used to being left out, but soon she'd be able to do things the way she wanted because I'd be gone. My heart ached, but I knew it was the right thing to do. Daddy always told me that when you find yourself in a bad situation, the right thing to do is the one that hurts the most. Katie, I couldn't believe that Rafe, my Rafe, was making me wait to do this. He should have rushed here at first sight. Something wasn't right. When he came in, he just did his thing and went to bed. "Nothing, Rafe, just sleep," I said angrily. I'm not sure, but I think there was a hint of a smile on his lips as he turned away from me. That should have been a red flag to me that something was wrong in my marriage, other than what I had done, but I didn't see it. The next morning when I woke up to get ready for work, Rafe was gone. For the first time in my memory, he didn't kiss me goodbye or say anything to me before he left. It was one of those things I could never cure him of. He always told me that if he got hurt or died or I died, he didn't want us to go into the next life without telling me he loved me and kissing me one last time. Rafe was a puppy. He wasn't a complex entity, so I never thought he had a plan or was up to anything. But he never refused to have sex with me. I've heard that every man has periods when he can't function, and we're in our 20s, so maybe last night he was just tired. But why was he sleeping away from me? I still needed Rafe, and I loved him in my own way, more than anyone else in the world. I knew I loved him far more than any feelings I had for Smith. But Smith was my ticket to the life I needed, and Rafe would never know about him. Rafe. I left the house as early as possible. I was really worried that Katie would want to do something upon waking up. It was strange that I could go from complete delight to complete disgust in 24 hours, but that was it. So I drove to the Home Depot store near the apartment before the sun was even up. It was open at 6 in the morning. I ordered materials from contractors and went to get coffee while my order was being filled. I stopped by the tool department and bought new blades for the jigsaw and circular saw. By the time I was done, I got a call to let me know that my order was fulfilled. I got receipts for all the items to present to Smith for reimbursement and then drove to the construction site. As I pulled up to the apartment, I could have sworn there was a light on the top floor. I pulled into the driveway, and when I looked again, the light was no longer on. Maybe I'd gotten confused about which apartment's light was on. It didn't matter, though, since they were all dark. The man Smith was renting the apartment for wasn't due to arrive for a few weeks, so no one should be here right now. I pulled out my keys and started unloading my stuff. First, I moved everything from the truck into the large living room. Then, using the sketches and measurements from the day before, I divided the load into smaller bags and moved each bag to the room it was intended for. The remaining materials for the outdoor deck were left in the living room. The deck is probably the last thing I'll be doing, and I didn't want the wood to get ruined by rain. After all the unloading and lugging of heavy items, it was time for a break. I sat down to drink some coffee. I guess I should have kept moving because as soon as I sat down, my thoughts went back to Kathy. I imagined her doing all sorts of things with Smith that I was too dumb and ignorant to know about. I remembered when we first came to California, how I had to work for a contracting firm until I got my license, and I could barely feed myself and pay Kathy's tuition. That first year, every time she took another class, we would eat tuna or bologna for a week or two to buy her textbooks. She was becoming successful and leaving me behind. I didn't regret a single thing I did or gave up for her. It just really hurt that she had betrayed me like that. I couldn't help it. The thought of having to live the rest of my life without her made me despair. Before I could stop them, tears started rolling down my cheeks, and I had to bite down hard on my lip to suppress the urge to just break down and really cry. In situations of strong emotion, it was okay to let out a few stray tears, but just sitting there sobbing wasn't manly. Since my dad didn't raise bitches, I wasn't about to start crying now. Wiping away my tears, I swear I saw movement at the top of the stairs. When I cleared my eyes, there was no one there. I walked back to the truck to grab my tool belt and strangely felt better after the emotional release. A vibration at my side scared the hell out of me, and I nearly jumped up to the ceiling. It was just my cell phone. I looked at the display and saw it was Kathy, so I didn't bother answering it. I needed to start preparing for the time when she would no longer be in my life. I didn't allow myself to think about where she was or what she was doing. By the end of the day, I would still know everything she was doing and with whom. The private investigator would give me daily reports until we had enough hard evidence to go to court. I started making the framework for the shelving unit in the living room. My plan was for the rack to support framed canvases and paintings of almost any width and height. There would be adjusting slats every 3 feet, so that 2 or more works of different sizes could be viewed or worked on side by side. For the living room, I have decided to make one shelving unit on the west wall and one opposite it on the east wall. If I built them this way, the shelving units would not interfere with the entrance or the fireplace. I started cutting the pieces of wood I needed, then drilled holes for screws and bolts to assemble them. I decided not to cut and drill all the wood at once, because I wanted to see how well the first option would work before committing to it and possibly wasting all the materials if the construction turned out to be shoddy. Besides, I was starting to think it would be a good idea to have at least one rack in the kit in case this guy came early. Artists were notoriously fickle, so who knows what could happen. By this time it was almost lunchtime and I knew where I wanted to go. Went back to Burger Queen, damn good burgers. I got back in my truck and headed out. On the way I noticed Smith's car parked outside the motel again. This time in a fit of anger I stopped, but immediately caught myself remembering my lawyer's advice not to do anything stupid. I slowly crept up to the expensive car, looking around to make sure no one was watching me. I pulled a sharply sharpened punch from my tool belt and slashed both rear tires. I then walked forward and flattened both front tires. I know it was childish, but it made me feel better. Then with the same fist I deeply scratched a line down the side of the car. I got back in the truck and drove off, feeling electrified. I ordered my usual burger at the Queen and decided that I would have to order less from now on. Too many burgers, and I would have a hard time replacing Katie when the time came. While I was there another thought ran through my head. The damage I'd done to Smith's car would affect him about as much as it would affect me to have to drive and buy those burgers. It was a minor inconvenience, but nothing more than that. It sobered me up and knocked the wind out of my sails. I'd traded the girl I'd loved since first grade for a few scrapes and a tire. When I got back to the apartment, I was almost in tears again. I went back inside ready to eat my burgers, and then it hit me. There must be something wrong with me for her to treat me like this. Apparently yesterday wasn't a one-time thing. I now realized that they had only given me this job to keep tabs on my whereabouts during their time together. This was all going to get very unpleasant quickly. There was nothing I could do to save my marriage. Kathy had always aspired to the good life. She wanted, maybe even needed things that I could never provide for her. The fact that I loved her and only her didn't matter. And in Smith, she found someone who not only could provide her with all of those things, but was the man she really wanted. The only thing left for me to do was to get out of their way. I really thought I had hit rock bottom in all of this yesterday, but it all happened again, only worse. There was no way I could get her back. It was like someone drove a dump truck full of concrete and then dumped the whole load on me. I fell to my knees and just sobbed. Every emotion I had ever felt just oozed out of me. It was the most hopeless sadness I had ever felt. Time had no meaning, I was defeated. I had heard people talk about wishing they were dead when a loved one left or abandoned them. And now I knew what that felt like. Everything was happening like in slow motion. Every action, every thought demanded my consent. And I saw no reason to do so. Should I take a breath? Why? Why shouldn't I just stop breathing and let go of the pain? If I died, maybe she would understand why I just gave up on life and feel sorry for me. Maybe things would start over and she would never hurt me like this again. Maybe she's just a cold snake who never loved me and never will. Maybe she'll just laugh when she finds out I'm dead because it will save her and Smith from having to get rid of me or divorce me. My death would be the last gift I would give her. Just then I felt a hand on my shoulder. I'm a pretty big guy, but I have to admit that this hand, though tiny, scared the hell out of me. I jumped almost to the roof. My heart was beating so fast it made me dizzy. When I turned around I saw a girl. It might have been a woman, but she was just so damn tiny. Katie is already small compared to me, but this woman was just tiny. She was barely 5 feet tall, if not more. She had curly brown hair that cascaded down her back, stopping where it overlapped her shoulders and spreading out in the front. But it wasn't the hair that stopped me in my tracks. It was the look on her face. I'd never seen so much worry in one expression. Her eyes were hard to describe. They were gray-green, piercing and alluring at the same time. They seemed to take in every detail of everything they looked at. The eyes didn't form opinions. There was no right or wrong in their gaze. They only measured and compared details. It was as if by seeing someone in this way, she could easily replicate all the objects she saw. And that's when she saw me. As my brain reconnected with my mouth and I realized I could speak, the words started to come out. "Hey, who the hell are you and why are you here?" snapped I. "You're so sad," she said in the thickest accent of English I'd ever heard. "This is my home," she said. "You're doing my, as you say, painting. Only I think you do better with these. What do you call them?" I was at a loss for words and the words just wouldn't come out. "I was hiding on the second floor and I smelled food again," she said smiling. "I've been dying to just come down and eat with you. But no one can know I'm here. I work day and night but I have no ideas. Only pictures with no vision. I might as well be working with a camera. It's not art. And while I watch you are consumed by this sadness, it threatens to take you. You must tell me about it, perhaps I can help. Come, let's go sit down and talk about it." She led me over to the same table I had been sitting at for days now. All this time I thought I was hearing things, and it seemed I was. She was again very petite and also clearly French. She was the person Smith had rented the apartment for. So I guess technically she was my employer's employer. Or in fact, she was my boss's boss. But she wasn't like that bastard Smith at all. She seemed really nice. She was concerned and caring. Those were not the words I would use to describe Smith. She opened the package and looked inside. Her little face lit up. "Great," she said. "You have enough for two." She busied herself arranging plates and silverware, then ran upstairs and came back with a bottle of some kind of wine. In a matter of minutes, the fast food had turned into a sumptuous meal. I wouldn't be surprised if she brought candles and a violinist. "Amanda Anderson," she said in an accent I was beginning to like. "Not a very French name," I said. "And you are," she said with a smile. "Rafe Jenkins," I said, shaking her tiny outstretched hand. Then we sat down at the table and ate my Burger Queen. For the next hour, we talked about a lot of things. We talked about her paintings. We talked about how she liked my shelving system, both for displaying her finished works and for coloring those that were in progress. She swore me to secrecy about the fact that she was already here. She wasn't due to arrive for another month. I promised her I wouldn't tell anyone. After a while, it became obvious that we were getting along well. We both had our own sorrows, neither of which we had yet seen fit to describe or discuss. I realized that her sadness was work-related. I didn't have much to do with art or painting, but I was sure she was good at it. Although I had to admit that I probably couldn't tell the difference between good art and bad art. As I turned my attention to the time, my cell phone rang and I noticed that it was past the time I was supposed to leave. I didn't know how the time had flown by, but I felt better than I had in the past few days. Amanda wasn't Kathy, but she was a woman, and a beautiful one at that. If she didn't think I was worthless, then maybe there was a life after Kathy after all. Katie. When I got home, I expected Rafe to be there by now. I decided to call him and hurry him up. I pressed the #1 button on my cell phone and it called him. His phone kept ringing and finally went to voicemail. He must be really busy since he didn't answer my call. I got up and decided to try to cook something. It would be an adventure because I don't know how to cook. I looked in the fridge and saw a plate with some steaks marinating on it. This would be pretty easy. I'll just put them in the oven to brown them and cook some vegetables in the microwave. I turned on the TV and found a cooking show. It was perfect, although the old fat woman on the show was cooking chicken. She was baking it, just like me. Along with the chicken, she was making baked potatoes. I can do that too. Then I'd just make a little salad and voila, dinner. Rafe would be proud of me. I couldn't believe I was doing this. My face flushed from the heat of the oven. I felt like some kind of pioneer woman. About an hour later, Rafe came in. He sort of half smiled at me and went into the bedroom. He walked with a slight limp, and it was hard for me to read the expression on his face. I had known this man his whole life, and he wasn't that complicated. Something was bothering him. When he looked at me, no matter what we were going through, all I could see on his face was love. When my dad told him that he was disappointed that I chose some ex-jock/carpenter to spend the rest of my life with, and I didn't say anything in his defense, Rafe looked a little sad. But I could still see the love for me in his eyes. It was always there, even in the worst of circumstances. But now, when I looked at him, all I saw was pain and sadness. In my hind mind, I knew something was wrong. Rafe, honey, are you hungry? I asked. I made us dinner, I replied proudly. It smells good, he said quickly. I hurt my back falling down the stairs. I had to go to the emergency room. They gave me some pills for the pain, but they made me so sleepy I almost couldn't make it home. I'm going to go to bed now, he said. Then he disappeared into the bedroom and closed the door. I turned off the oven and didn't know what to do with the food, so I just left it on the table. Rafe would deal with it later or tomorrow. I walked to the darkened bedroom and crawled under the covers. I turned to kiss Rafe and found myself looking not at his face but at his feet. I shook him and he cried out. Rafe, what's wrong? I asked. Any movement makes my back hurt, he replied. Why are you lying like that? I asked. I use pillows to lift my legs above my head to stimulate blood flow, he said. I'm tired, he yawned. The pain pills knocked me out. I just lay like that for a while. Part of me was so frustrated that I was thinking about getting out and relieving myself. The other part felt like something was wrong. Finally, when I was about to fall asleep, I said, "Good night, Rafe. I love you." The next moment I was already waking up. Throughout most of my life, Rafe always told me that he loved me. He was the first of us to say it. And on those rare occasions when I spoke first, and believe me, there weren't many, he always responded within a few microseconds. This time he just mumbled something almost unintelligible. Though my conscious mind couldn't make out the words, my subconscious picked up on them, and I woke up. Rafe's mumbled response sounded something like, "Tell that to Smith." Suddenly my brain was firing on all 8 cylinders. There were 2 possibilities here. The first was that Rafe was getting a little jealous of the time I was spending with Smith, and was avoiding me, pouting like the little boy he always was. The second, worst-case scenario was that Rafe knew about me and Smith. I couldn't sleep. My mind kept running through all the facts I had. I rolled over onto my back and brought my head close to his head. I tried to cuddle him as gently as I could, but as soon as my hand touched his, he pulled away from me. I dozed off for a second, and when I woke up, he was gone. He couldn't have gone to work. It was only 3 in the morning. I eventually found him stretched out on the couch in the living room. I went back to bed, but set my alarm to wake me up early in the morning. When I woke up at 6 a.m., I found him gone. I still didn't know if he knew or not, but he was definitely avoiding me, and it wasn't very pleasant. I went back to bed and woke up at my usual time to be in the office at 9 a.m. When Smith arrived at 10, I took his morning latte and scones to him and waited to talk to him. Smith drank his coffee and scanned the financial pages, and I just had to wait for him to finish. That was another trait I didn't like about him. His needs were far more important than anyone else's. Was that really how I felt about Rafe? Until now, I hadn't realized how much he must love me to put up with this. "There's something we need to discuss, my sweet," he said. "I think Rafe knows about us," I replied quickly. "Good," he said. That will help speed things up considerably. What? Said I. Yeah, it means you can divorce him when the time comes and be with me. You and I are a lot alike in a lot of ways, he said. We both love the finer things in life. We both strive for excellence. We are compatible in everything. We should be together, he said. You've outgrown the hay carpenter. He just can't do for you what I can. He's not my equal anywhere, he continued. I was shocked, so I started nodding my head as if to agree with him and went back to my desk. I needed to think about it. What Smith had said couldn't have pleased my father, and until yesterday, me. My father had always thought Rafe was beneath me. But Rafe had never shown me anything but love. He constantly sacrificed himself to be with me. Smith, on the other hand, kept me close to him as a convenience. I was Rafe's raison d'etre. His world revolved around me. Smith's world centered on himself. Rafe. I got out of the truck and dragged 2 bags behind me. I walked to the door of the dark apartment and began juggling the bags and keys. I turned on the light and placed the bags on the table. I gently knocked on the door leading to the upper, still hidden level of the apartment. It opened almost instantly, as if it had been waiting for me. I wasn't sure you were coming back, she said. I wasn't sure if you'd open the door again or if you'd even be here, I replied. I should trust you, she said, walking into the kitchen. What do you have here? She asked. Well, I don't know. What do you usually eat for breakfast? Or what you ate while you were hiding out here? But I brought you this, I said, pointing to one of the packages. She opened the package and smiled. I brought her a double-sized mocha latte and a croissant, with an assortment of toppings she could add. She almost burst out laughing and looked into the other bag. She looked questioningly at my breakfast McClowney, as if it might jump off the plate and bite her. She also smiled as she smelled my strong black coffee. The McClowney breakfast was a totally American invention. It consisted of one of those synthetic egg patties, 4 strips of bacon, American cheese, and a sausage patty, all placed between halves of a sliced English muffin. Most people would get fat just by looking at it. Eating the muffin was known to completely clog the arteries and clog them with fatty deposits. Breakfast McClowney's was the reason America was so damn fat. Burger Queen didn't have anything like breakfast McClowney's. She shook her head, looking at the decadent sandwich with amazement. Then she raced around the kitchen, turning on lights and arranging plates as she had done the night before. For some reason, she pulled out knives and forks and 2 cups. Then she ran upstairs and came down with a small bottle of orange juice. While I sat there in amazement, she got glasses out of the cupboard. As she ran around me, I had time to look at her. Seeing her in the light, I immediately realized several things. First, this was a truly beautiful woman. Not the Las Vegas, California, silicone blonde style. She was just really beautiful. She was the kind of woman who, as she gets older, gets wrinkles on her face and maybe a little sagging here and there, will never worry about it because all those supposed imperfections give her face character. My Kathy, standing next to this woman, would seem as big and clumsy as a cow. And she wouldn't even stand close in her fancy outfits. I marveled again at the way she took the dishes I offered her and turned them into a feast rather than a meal and seemed to enjoy it. When we sat down across from each other, she quickly bowed her head for a few brief seconds and then raised it, smiled and began shoving the food down her throat with a greed that had to be seen to be believed. I looked down at my plate. She had destroyed my McClowney's breakfast. She had cut it in half and divided the ingredients into 2 breakfasts. We both got a couple slices of bacon, half a sausage and egg patty each, and half an English muffin, which she spread with jam. We also each had a small glass of juice and a cup of my black coffee. I hate that sweet fake coffee you brought me, she said. It tastes like a leaf. Why do you all drink it? I don't drink it, I replied. But people here think that's how they drink it in Europe. I need strong black coffee when I'm working, she said, taking a bite of a slice of bacon. She reached for one of my slices of bacon, and my hand reached out to stop her. She smiled again and then took the bacon from me. We'll share it, she said with mischief in her eyes. Wait, I asked. Why are we going to share my bacon? Because Rafe Jenkins, I already ate mine, she smiled. The only woman I had ever been with in my life was Kathy, and she had never had that effect on me. At the thought of Kathy, my mood dropped again, and Amanda noticed it. So what are you going to do today while I work, Jenkins? She asked. I'm going to frame the cages on the deck so you can work inside and I won't get in your way, I replied. Why don't you work on the shelving you started in the living room? That way we can talk while we work, she said. That would be lovely, I said, surprised. I'd always imagined artists to be temperamental and withdrawn, like that freak Smith. Amanda seemed so down-to-earth and humble, it was hard to imagine her as a famous artist. I went to my truck and got my tool belt and toolbox. I brought everything I needed into the living room. As I got to work, I noticed that Amanda had already pulled out a canvas from somewhere and was hurriedly drawing figures on a blank sheet of paper with a small brush. It was mesmerizing and I felt like I could watch her forever. She seemed to alternate between very deliberate and carefully measured strokes and furious, haphazard ones. Again, this was not the behavior or style I expected from a famous artist. I was afraid to start the saw, thinking the noise might distract or frighten her. When I saw that she had sat down in front of the canvas and was looking at it, I raised my hand and pointed to the saw. She smiled and nodded that it was okay. She came over and watched me line up the pieces and then cut them. We got a talking and she told me why she came in early. She didn't seem to like any of the pieces she had made for the exhibition. They were just a repetition of what she had already done. She didn't find them inspirational and felt she was just selling herself. Buyers and collectors would certainly be pleased because she sold a lot of things that looked like Amanda Anderson paintings, but she felt she had to break new ground and continue to explore her art. So she would come in early to view her new work and try to do something different, hoping that the change of place, culture, and environment would get her creative juices bubbling. I, in turn, told her about my sham marriage. I didn't name names, not knowing how she would take the information that her agent was having fun with my wife. She was very sympathetic. I was actually relieved that I told her everything. I never told anyone about my situation except my lawyer and private investigator. When noon came, we went out to eat. We found a nice little restaurant by the river. As good as it was there, I couldn't take another bite of Burger Queen. Amanda, as I expected, was great company. She made me laugh and pointed out some of the differences between life in our country and hers. So it went on for the next few weeks. I spent all my days in the apartment with Amanda, turning it into the perfect studio for an artist. I would come home in the evening, barely making it home in time to slip into bed, get up before Katie, and go out again in the morning. The few times we did run into each other were hellish. Kathy kept saying we needed to talk, and I claimed I was too busy or too tired. Finally, 2 weeks before the show, Amanda officially came to town. After inspecting the apartment, she told Smith that she really liked the apartment, the rack system, and the exterior cabinets for her job. She also asked that the foreman in charge of the job be present because she had changes and ideas she wanted him to do as well. Smith told her he would see to it. I was happy about this development because it meant that I would be able to spend more time with Amanda and that we would be able to go to different places without worrying about anyone recognizing her. What I didn't know yet was that my little bubble of happiness was about to burst. I got a call from Smith asking me to meet him at his office. I already knew where this was going. He was going to ask me to do the work Amanda had asked me to do. But what I didn't expect was that when I got there early, I found Smith there with Kathy. Although I had DVDs and pictures of them together, seeing it right in front of me was another thing entirely. I felt like all my emotions about these two were contained. And here it felt like someone had just ripped my stomach out through my throat. There was a look of lust on Smith's face that is impossible to describe. Kathy looked like she was just putting up with it. When Smith finally noticed me standing there, he pulled his arm out so fast I thought he was going to break his elbow. And Katie immediately launched into the classic line. Rafe, it's not what you think. It's just a medical necessity and you didn't want to break your husband's heart. Come on, old boy. You don't have to say platitudes, Smith said. That was wrong because at that moment, I crossed the room and punched Smith in the face. There was an unpleasant crack, almost a pop, as my fist made contact with his nose. He tumbled over the table and fell behind it. I started to circle the table behind him but stopped. Neither of them were worth it. I told you if you lay a finger on her, I'll kick your ass, I pounced on Smith. She's all yours. He curled up behind the desk, clamped his nose shut and cried. Rafe, wait, Katie yelled as she followed me out of the office. We can fix this. It doesn't mean anything. I got in my truck and just drove off. I spent the next hour or so just driving around the city aimlessly. I needed to pull myself together, but I couldn't. I decided to do what the guys on TV always did in situations like this. Go home and pack as much stuff as I could carry, then check into a motel. That didn't work. As soon as I pulled over, the bitch headed toward me. I put the car in reverse and pulled into the driveway, and she ran after me screaming. I decided it would be best to just do something that would still keep me happy. I needed an activity that would allow me to think while I did it. I also didn't want to stay in a motel just yet, because with Smith's money, it wouldn't take him long to track me down. So I would check into the motel just before I went to bed and check out right after I woke up. If I stayed in a different place every night, it would be very difficult for them to track me down. Now that I knew, and they knew I had to file the paperwork first, so I called my lawyer and told him to make sure the paperwork was ready. I then drove to work at Amanda's apartment. When she opened the door and smiled, it was like the sun coming out after a long, rainy night. Her infectious good mood almost took my mind off the whole thing. I kept wondering when you'd get here, she said brightly. You're late. Let's go see what we have to eat, she said. There was a trait in Amanda, perhaps European or even French. For her, the most important thing was comfort. Eat, drink, and be merry. Don't stress. Problems would solve themselves. Her breakfast was set up as if a king had been waiting for it. There were all sorts of muffins and cookies, coffee, tea and juices, butters in different flavors, jams, jellies and spreads, cold cuts, bacon, sausages and ham. There were bowls of different kinds of fruit and melons. Just gimmicky. If this is what she was used to, she must still be laughing at the fact that I was sharing a meal from Burger Queen with her. What's it all for? I asked. It's all for us, she said smiling. I called the agency and said I needed breakfast for 2. Let's eat, and then you can tell me what made you so angry. No, I said. I don't want to talk about it. I just want to forget. Okay, she said, pouting her lips as she sometimes did. Then we'll just eat. At those words, she nodded her head as if she had just resolved a serious argument, and it was adorable. The exhibition was only 5 days away, and Amanda had a lot of work to do to prepare her new pieces. She also had several sketches that may or may not make it into the exhibition. She still hadn't decided on a theme for the exhibition. Sometimes she didn't have a theme. She would just show her latest work and offer it for sale through a gallery or broker. Her last show brought her over $600,000, 30% of which went to the agency, and after taxes, she made about $290,000. Her goal was to make a couple $1,000,000 and then retire. The problem was that she just couldn't resist traveling and shopping. It was like she was looking for something, but she didn't know what it was. So after the meal, Amanda made me promise to finish the shelving in the little room upstairs that she used for work. The big room, as she called the living room, would be used for an impromptu preview for some gallery owners and art critics before the show. Amanda worked in the great room, putting the finishing touches on her finished or nearly finished works in the great room, and I would point out to her places to hang or put what she was currently working on. I grabbed my tool belt from the truck and climbed the stairs. The first room I looked into turned out not to be a studio, but her bedroom. I don't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't the same. Katie always had everything neatly arranged, and she made sure I didn't forget about it. All of her makeup and clothes were shelved and arranged by color so she could put together outfits at a moment's notice. Amanda's room was chaos in comparison. It looked more like a teenage girl's room. There were things scattered everywhere. On the desk was a computer with a drawing program on. A forgotten laptop with another graphics program lay on the bed. The radio was on and there were clothes, socks, shoes, notebooks, random sheets, and scraps of paper lying everywhere. I wondered how she even found anything in this mess. But then it hit me. This randomness was like her. It hinted at all sorts of possibilities. She was saying that if you look, you can find anything, but you have to dedicate yourself to the search. It said that you shouldn't expect things to be the way you want them to be. It said that you shouldn't make plans, you should just live. I closed the door, smiled for the first time that day, and went in search of the studio. I found it a few minutes later and wished I hadn't. Surprise, shock, and pain fought for supremacy in my mind. A strong mixture of emotions boiled up like soup in a cauldron and burst out of me in the form of rage. For the second time that day, I snapped. Amanda had an almost photographic memory for detail, studying faces and people who seemed interesting to her. On a large canvas was a picture of a homeless woman we'd seen in the park. There was the Burger Queen guy, in all his greasy, pimply teenage face glory. There were a few pictures of me too, with her clearly seeing me in a different light than she saw me in reality. There were also a few of Smith and Katie. And there was another picture of Smith and Katie together. I wondered when she had seen them. Did Amanda know about them? Did she know who they were? Could she have been involved in all of this from the beginning? Seeing these images reminded me of the scene that happened this morning, in all its poignancy. A red haze clouded my vision and I simply reacted. Amanda sometimes worked in watercolor, and she had large paint cans of different colors that she used to mix her paints. I grabbed a full can of paint and threw it across the room where it shattered on a large canvas, splattering paint on a couple pictures of that smirking, snickering bastard Smith. Without even thinking about it, I screamed with rage and splashed another can of paint on Smith and another on the pictures of my unfaithful wife. By this time, Amanda had run down the stairs to see what was going on. She had a man with her, he was terrified. Amanda took one look at what I had done and took drastic action. She came into the room and handed me another can of paint and then pointed to the still intact painting of Smith and Katie together. She then nodded and stepped back. I opened the can and this time more purposefully splashed the paint onto the canvas. Then Amanda started giving me smaller cans of paint, and I just threw them one at a time onto the paintings until I couldn't lift anymore. I fell to my knees, completely exhausted. Amanda crouched down next to me, stroking my head and shoulders. "That's what you're so sad about, isn't it?" I nodded my head, unable to look her in the eyes. At that moment, the little man recovered from his shock and started yelling at me. "Do you know what you did?" he shouted. "Each of these paintings was worth probably $20,000. You'll be paying for them for the rest of your life," he yelled, "and you won't get away with it. Security has video of you doing it. Just wait until I take you to court. You can't even start paying her until you get out of jail," the man muttered. "Why are you so angry?" asked Amanda calmly. "These are my paintings, not yours," she said. "There will be no trial, no charges, no payment. And if you are only concerned about your remuneration, perhaps we can make arrangements so that you don't have to worry about receiving compensation for my work in the future," she continued. You may not have noticed that I ended up helping him throw the paint, but the little man began. You were just leaving, Amanda finished. Katie, this part of my story, our story, as my dad always said, is where the rubber meets the road. When Rafe walked in and found Smith with me, I thought my life was over. Smith had been using me more and more lately, but it was always the same. The comparison between him and Rafe was not only inevitable, but obvious. That morning was another example of that. Or should I say his, life consisted of going to the motel, which lately had been his office, and doing this. I was always waiting for him to say get out, or hand me $5 after we were done, and I was getting tired of it. I didn't feel like myself anymore. I was used to being sought after and appreciated. I was used to being loved. I was used to Rafe, and damn it, I missed him. It was then that I realized that after all our lives, after all this time, I really did love Rafe, much more than I wanted to admit. I just took him for granted because he was always there for me when I needed him. I missed his puppy dog eyes when he looked at me. The way he did literally everything I asked him to do. I missed the way he put me first, even without looking at his own needs. I remember waking up late one morning when I had a job interview, calling Rafe and telling him my clothes weren't ready. He came home from work, made me breakfast and ironed my clothes while I showered and applied my makeup. Smith would never do anything like that for me. I didn't even know where Smith lived. How could I have been so stupid? My dad had obviously raised a stupid kid. All week I tried to talk to Rafe. He wouldn't talk to me at all. He knows I need a lot of sleep. He should know that since he's taken care of me for so many years. And he always comes in after I fall asleep and leaves before I wake up. Sometimes he doesn't even sleep in the same bed with me. I can't believe it's been so long since we made love. Now I was even more sure that Rafe not only knew about me and Smith, but he had also lost me to Smith. From the way he was looking at me now, he was trying to hide it. But his puppy dog eyes and expression of endless love were gone. Sometimes, from across the room, I would catch his gaze and there was only disgust in his eyes. Rafe had always been one of those soft-hearted, good old boys. Never had a harsh word to say about anyone. Now there was always a much harsher expression on his face. A cynicism that hadn't always been there. I knew it was my fault. I had taken a good cause, a good man, and ruined it. I was in such shock that I don't remember a single word that was said. I remember sitting on the desk with my legs open, so I jumped down and closed them. I know I said something really stupid, and I remember Rafe struggling with pain on his face to keep control of himself and then turning around to walk away. I remember Rafe turning to walk away and turning around and hitting Smith harder than I could have imagined. I still remember Smith flying across the table, leaving a trail of blood behind him, and just lay there crying. I remember running after Rafe, trying to get him to talk to me so I could tell him how I felt. I needed to tell him that I was wrong, that we could make things right. I would do whatever he wanted, live the life he wanted, but it was too late. He was gone. Had Rafe really spoken the words, "She's all yours"? I went back to the room to get my keys and found Smith still lying there, whimpering. "Is he gone?" he asked with obvious fear on his face. Smith looked like he was in pain to speak. His nose was badly swollen and was clearly broken. I helped him to his feet and told him to call his doctor. I took him to the doctor's office and waited for him to be examined. I sat there while Smith lied to his doctor. He told the doctor that he walked through a door that he thought was unlocked, but it was not. When the doctor looked at Smith, he looked like he didn't believe him. That's when Smith came up with lie number 2. He told the doctor that he took up boxing. The doctor told Smith that at his age, he should have chosen another sport. He gave Smith an injection to anesthetize the spot and set his nose back up. In doing so, he yelled a lot, which I didn't think was enough for the pain Smith was causing Rafe and me anyway. He gave me a prescription for another painkiller for Smith and I drove him back to the office. Under the circumstances, it seemed odd that Smith wouldn't let me take him home, but I didn't have time to think about it. I knew Rafe would eventually go home and I needed to be there when he did. I was lucky. I was there before he was. I realized this because everything, including Rafe's stuff, was all there. I walked the floors thinking about what exactly I was going to say to him. I had been counting on him for years to do what I wanted him to do, to get him to listen to me. I was willing to give him anything he wanted just to get him to forgive me. Thank God for Ford trucks. I heard that truck pull up before I was even in our driveway. I ran out to meet it, which was probably a mistake. Rafe looked up, saw me, and immediately pulled out of the driveway. He didn't even slow down as I chased him down the driveway. I went back into the house and just started crying, which was unusual for me. Like I said, my dad had raised me to be a great achiever, a driven, success-oriented person, not some whiny mouse. But in this case, I thought about everything I'd done my whole life and I didn't see any good it would do me. If Rafe and I had saved money and been careful, he could have had a successful contracting business and I could have thrived in business. Perhaps we would have been rich or at least wealthy, but in the end, the best thing we had was each other. When older people, whether rich or poor, looked back on their lives, what they talked about most was not what they had or what they bought. They talked about what they did and the people they did it with. In trying to make the life I thought I wanted, I had almost given up on the person with whom that life could be most meaningful. The people Smith introduced me to, rich and important people, didn't really accept me as one of them. As an equal, they accepted me as Smith's employee. I didn't think any of them, male or female, would have recognized me even if they had fallen over me. I looked at my watch. It had been over 2 hours and I couldn't believe I had spent so much time crying into my beer. I needed to come up with a plan to get my man back. My cell phone rang and I picked it up and looked in the mirror. I looked like shit. My makeup was all over my face, making me look like a clown. If anyone saw me like this, they'd wonder what had happened to me. I was supposed to be beautiful. If they saw me like this, they would joke about it forever. A face from which 1,000 barbs rained down. "Hi," I said, giving my voice a strength and determination I didn't feel. "Kathleen, where are you?" "I'm at home." "Where do you think I am?" I replied. It was Smith, of course. "We're in trouble. Something's happened to Amanda," he said. "I'll be right there," I said into the phone. This would give me a chance to quit working for Smith. I wanted to do it personally, wanted to be professional about it. I also wanted there to be no emotion involved. I figured he'd want the same thing. To keep things quiet. After all, he had his reputation to worry about. And the fact that an affair with a married subordinate wouldn't be the best thing for his career. When I got to the office, it was all I could do to keep from laughing. If I thought I looked like a clown with makeup running down my face, at least I had time to wash my face and reapply my makeup. Smith looked much worse. His nose was so swollen, it looked like a balloon was sticking out of his face. His cheeks were also swollen and his whole face was red. Hoping to maintain professional decorum, I restrained the impulse to laugh. "What happened to Miss Anderson?" I asked. "I got a call from her personal manager telling me that some rascal had destroyed some of her artwork," Smith replied. "I called her before I called you and she said the matter had been settled to her satisfaction and everything was fine," he said. "If everything is fine, why the hell did you make me come here?" Snapped I. "I have a marriage that's on life support." "That's exactly why you need to be here," he said. "If you want to get him back, though I can't imagine why you'd want to, here's what you need to do," he told me. "You need to threaten him with divorce. Scare the hell out of him and make him come crawling back to you. If you present yourself in a strong way, fool him into thinking we're going to be together, he'll come running, tail tucked. Then you can dictate the terms of your marriage, not the other way around," he said. In my weakened emotional state, his words made sense. I didn't even notice what he said. Trick him into thinking we're going to be together. First of all, we need to keep it quiet until after the show, he said. If the show goes well, I'll move up the career ladder and you'll be with me, he continued. But shouldn't I hire a lawyer? I asked weakly. Hell no, he said as if in shock. His reaction to that question should have alerted me, but it didn't. We need to keep this a secret, he said. And don't worry, he can't do anything either. He doesn't have any proof. He only has what he saw or thinks he saw. And if he makes any accusations, I'll just charge him with assault and use you as a witness to get him to drop the divorce proceedings, he said confidently. And after the show is over and that little French bitch is out of the country, all three of us will sit down and calmly discuss things. I'm sure we can come to an agreement one way or another, he said. Rafe, when I had time to calm down, I realized what my anger had gotten me into. We were sitting in deck chairs facing each other. Amanda, oddly enough, was gently rubbing my temples with her fingers. She was doing a sort of head massage. It felt wonderful and I didn't want her to ever stop. Amanda, I'm so sorry, I said. Shoo, she replied. If it takes me forever, I'll pay you back, I said. Any terms you can think of, I said seriously. At that moment, Amanda looked me in the eye. I swear I thought she was going to kiss me. There was a timid knock on the door, and then a very feminine voice came through. There you are, honey. And I was wondering where you were, it said. In the doorway, the biggest man I'd ever seen and probably the most cheerful was looking at us and smiling. He walked over to us and Amanda went up and hugged him tightly. How jealous I was. Victor Wang, meet Rafe Jenkins, she said excitedly. Now I know why you've been hiding, Victor said. As he spoke, he looked at me and I had the urge to put on more clothes, even though I was fully dressed. Amanda and Victor walked to the large room and looked at her work. I followed them and watched, sensing that Amanda and I still had a lot to discuss. He moved quietly from painting to painting and examined them side by side. He seemed to cast no more than a cursory glance at each one. He said, glancing quickly at a landscape. Ah, he said, looking at what I thought was a beautiful painting of two small children. Well, he said, you painted them. A snide expression appeared on his face. That expression alone told me that he didn't like either of the paintings. What do you think? Amanda asked. Well, honey, like I said, you painted them. That alone will get you a lot of money from rich idiots who think they can own art. But, said Amanda, but between you and me, honey, just looking at them bores me to death and not in a good way. He paused for a moment, then spoke again. It's kind of like how old rock stars can't think of anything new and put out a greatest hits album, sometimes even when they didn't have any greatest hits. Kind of looking for money before settling down and becoming music teachers, he added. Do you have anything else? He asked with doubt in his voice. Anything new and original? Well, I've been working on a set of etudes, but they were irreparably damaged and probably won't be restored, Amanda said timidly. Is there any chance you could just redo them? He asked. Well, if you look at them, I'll consider it. But no, I think the subject is too painful on a personal level, she said. If I hadn't realized I was falling in love with Amanda before, now it was obvious. This guy was something of an art historian who, although he was supposed to be her friend, told her pretty much the same thing she told me. He thought the artwork she brought back with her from France sucked. Oh, they were good paintings that could be sold for thousands of dollars, but they would do nothing to enhance her reputation as an artist. Even knowing this, she almost refused to repaint the works upstairs for fear of offending me. And even as she said this, her eyes met mine. If you like them, if you think they're good, she'll redraw them, I said quietly. Well, sugar, let's see, he said loudly. Walking through us, he looked at us both in turn and then put his hands up between us like he was cutting or chopping something in karate. Amanda and I looked at each other. We were both puzzled. She shrugged in the universal "I don't know what the hell that means" gesture. We followed his bulky figure up the stairs, and Amanda showed us the way to the studio when we got to the top. Victor entered the room and looked at the destruction left behind by my rampage. He looked around the room very slowly, stopping and looking intently at certain items, and then stepped back, nearly knocking us out of the room. He shook his head negatively and looked at me. I looked down at my feet bashfully, shoving my hands firmly into my pockets. "Get out of here," he said in a high-pitched tone that increased in pitch as he spoke. "Why didn't you show me this first?" he asked excitedly. "Amanda, you have to find a way to replicate this room completely," he ranted excitedly. Rage, raw emotion, irritation, just pain, he practically shouted. The only pain I understood was the headache his voice was causing. "This is what you needed, girl. This is it. Obviously, you had something to do with it," he said, pointing at me. "You're not hitting her, are you?" he asked. "Of course not," I snapped back. "What makes you think that?" Amanda asked. "Well, honey, the tension between you two is so thick you can touch it," he said. "So I thought maybe you two had a fight, and this was the result of the argument. Can I get a camera crew in here to start taking pictures for my article? Or will you give me exclusive access until the show?" he asked excitedly. "Before the show," Amanda said, "we have some things to discuss and decide." Victor waved us off and headed for the door, muttering loudly as he went. Amanda just stared at me, and I stood there like a deer caught in the headlights. I didn't understand anything that was going on and hoped she would explain it to me. But in typical Amanda fashion, she just looked at me and then very carefully went back into the room and looked everything over. Every detail of the room came under her scrutiny. Then she rushed out, ordering me not to move. She disappeared into the jungle she called her bedroom, and I heard objects flying around the room and her voice swearing in a mixture of English and French. A few moments later, she emerged with a very sophisticated-looking camera. Maybe she wasn't that great, but what did I know about cameras? She stopped right in front of me, propped herself up on her toes and kissed me. She kissed me right on the lips. I was shocked. Unless you count my mother, Amanda was only the second woman to ever kiss me. It was only a brief kiss, but it said a lot about what would follow. The events of the last few minutes had made me forget about all the problems and pain for a while. I watched her take pictures first of the entire room from almost every angle imaginable. Then she went back and photographed each picture from every possible angle. She made soft cooing noises as she worked. Then she set the camera aside and began measuring the dimensions of the room, the placement of the windows, even pulled out a device that measured the intensity and direction of light in the room. She raised one small but determined finger to hold me in place and keep me still. She pulled out her cell phone and dialed a few numbers. When the connection was established, she began speaking rapidly in French to whoever was on the other end and then waited. When she spoke again, it was already in English. "No, I cannot speak to him about this and it must be done immediately," she said. "I will send you pictures shortly. I will also send measurements. The room must be completely duplicated exactly as it is," she said. "We will have 2 rooms. In front will be the usual gallery where my new French collection will be displayed. And further back, there will be a special room where my new work will be displayed," she continued. "Entrance to the main room will be regular, but you will have to pay extra to enter the second room. We'll work out all the details when we meet tomorrow. We'll also need to modify the contracts." Well, we only agreed to show the paintings I brought with me from France, so it looks like we'll have to renegotiate the contract with the new paintings. But if you don't agree, we can have an exhibition with only the French works as previously agreed and I can organize a show of my other works at another agency, she said. In a tone that didn't tolerate objections. I was already used to Amanda the woman and Amanda the artist, but Amanda the businesswoman was a completely different animal. "I found some of your employees. How shall I say it in English? Deficiencies," she said. Yes, yes, we'll meet tomorrow, she snapped, hung up and went into the bedroom. There, she shoved the measurement sheets into the scanner and sent them off somewhere. Then she pulled the memory card out of the camera and loaded some pictures in there. Rafe Jenkins, where are we eating tonight? She asked me. Her smile was very different from how she normally looked. There were a lot more teeth, but the overall expression on her face wasn't happy. It was victory, conquest, and 100 other more subtle emotions combined into one facial expression. It was like a hungry wolf looking at a cornered rabbit. When she met my gaze, her smile turned back into the expression I was used to seeing from her. There were fewer teeth in that smile and there was sadness in her eyes again. Or maybe it was sadness for me. I know you're not feeling very well right now, she said. I'll do everything in my power to make you feel better. But right now we have many, many things to discuss and as you know, I like to talk over meals. So where are we going to eat? She asked, smiling. Texas Roadhouse, I laughed. Katie. That night Rafe didn't come home at all. Although I listened to Smith's ideas on how to handle him, I had my doubts. My idea was to try to talk to Rafe anyway and use Smith's plan as a last resort. Smith didn't realize that Rafe had two things that worked for him. He had used these two things successfully even back to his high school football days. The first was luck. Maybe because Rafe was a good guy at heart, luck just followed him. Even when it seemed like he messed up, things always worked out for him and usually for me. But this time, it looked like we had a falling out and I couldn't count on luck to help me. Rafe's second advantage was that he was so damn unpredictable. Even on the football field, defenders had a tough time tracking him because he just never seemed to run where they thought he would or do what they thought he'd do. Smith should have known that from yesterday. I was sure that somehow Rafe would end up smelling like roses and I'd be covered in shit. So I waited for him to make sure he didn't do his little trick of sneaking into the house after I was asleep. I spread a blanket and pillows in the doorway and slept there. That way, he couldn't even open the door without waking me up. I would still toss and turn all night. I would wake up at the slightest sound and look for him. Finally, at 3 in the morning, I realized that my husband wasn't coming home. I also realized that I had driven him away from me. For the first time in a long time, tears rolled down my cheeks and I couldn't hold back the sobs. I didn't want to be a tough, strong woman anymore. I just wanted my husband back. I arrived at the office later than usual and it was bustling with activity. Everyone from temp to secretaries to agents were running around the office as if their jobs depended on it. I wondered what my dad would think of my destiny for greatness. I know how my mom would feel about it. She would have said quietly because Mom never yelled or even raised her voice. Katie, you have succeeded and failed at the same time. Mom always liked to say something positive. You've succeeded in several areas you never even dreamed of, so congratulations to you, girl. True, you failed in one minor area so we'll have to be more careful next time, she said. Let's look at your progress first. In terms of chasing away the one person who loved you more than Daddy and me, you succeeded. Well done. In terms of becoming the biggest whore the county has ever produced, you've succeeded. Well done. As for saving your marriage, well, we'll probably have to write it off as a defeat, but we'll do better next time. I heard my mom say this as if she were standing right next to me. Before I could start crying again, the door to Smith's office opened and I heard shouting coming from inside as one of the secretaries ran out of the room, closing the door behind her. Don't go in there, she warned. One of the partners, a family member, is chewing Smith's ass out. I thought Smith was a partner, I said. The woman ran off laughing. A few minutes later, the door opened again and I heard a scrap of conversation. And do something about your face. You look like a goddamn circus clown. I saw Smith walk out followed by a smaller man. He had graying hair and was dressed in what appeared to be a very cheap suit. His shoes were not expensive or polished. Next to Smith, he looked like a bum, but he exuded a sense of authority that I had never seen before. He spoke politely or nodded to everyone he passed, regardless of his position. He was polite even to the elevator operator. Where had I seen this kind of behavior before? That was Rafe's behavior. He was polite to everyone we met. I was like that too until I became important. Smith noticed me and gestured for me to come into his office. Who was that? I asked. We don't have time for questions right now, he snapped back. For some reason, we were caught off guard. Something serious had happened to Amanda, and I, as her representative at the agency, should have been the first to know about it and deal with the problem. That little idiot Marcel came here and told me something was going on. But when I called the bitch, she said everything was fine. Now new things have happened. She wants to renegotiate the contract and she called the main office. Brandon was just here. He smells money and he's never wrong, Smith said. The fact that she wants to renegotiate also means she has something new, he said uncertainly. According to Brandon, she's hinted that she might go to another agency because we're not doing our job. I have to do something to fix what happened, but I don't know what. If I can somehow make this little bitch happy again, I'll still succeed. But if I can't, or God forbid, lose this account, I could be screwed, he said seriously. But what would you do? I asked. What would we do? He snapped back. If I leave, you leave too. So get your head out of your ass worrying about your red-cheeked husband and let's get to work, he hissed. It was the first time he had ever spoken to me in that tone and manner. I didn't like it, and again the comparison between him and Rafe became obvious. Smith, a sophisticated wealthy man whom I idolized when he was frustrated by business problems, would start talking down to me with veiled threats like I was a piece of shit. Why was this so important to him after all? He had told me so many times that it was all just a game. He had millions of dollars and didn't need the income. On the other hand, even when Rafe's life was crumbling around him because of my betrayal, he never talked to me like that. I realized that Rafe probably knew about Smith and me and kept coming home and having to sit there and be polite, even knowing what I had done to him. He was doing it in hopes that I would come back to him. I was a fool. Maybe she called and needed something and we weren't home. It could have been yesterday when we were at your doctor's office, I said. Yes, Smith said. That's entirely possible. And we can play on that, he said, trying to smile. My face might help us. I'll go over there and let her see me like this. She's not like you. She's a woman, so she'll sympathize, he snarled. I'll explain to her that because of this injury, I was unavailable to her, he said. Smith leaned back in his chair and invited me to come over to his desk. He turned the chair around to give me access and pointed to his zipper. Smith, we got caught last time, just yesterday, I whined. Then lock the door and come here, he said. But, I began. Smith interrupted my words with a look. I should have expected it. The little man, Brandon, had taken Smith's power, so Smith needed to lord it over someone else to make himself feel good in turn. I was saved by a heavy knock on the door. I quickly turned and opened it. A woman burst into the room carrying several papers. This is all I could get, she said excitedly. Apparently, she has a new concept and a partner for something very radical. How radical can painting be? Smith asked. I don't know. They don't give you any information, said the woman. You mean they won't give you any, snapped Smith. No, when I called your name, they got quiet, the woman said. And before that, everyone was excited and talking. They're building a separate room and charging more for admission. The second entrance fee will be donated to a major charity. So there's a lot of hype around it, she said. Several critics who have seen photos of the exhibit are thrilled. And she and her new partner set it up overnight, the woman said. Maybe Miss Jenkins can help you, the woman said, pointing at me. How the hell can she help? Smith asked. The woman turned around and was about to leave the room, but only stopped when Smith called out. "Where are you going? I don't have to put up with that kind of abuse from you, Mr. Benson. I don't work for you." "I work for the firm," she said curtly. "I'm sorry," Smith said. "Please, I'm just upset." "Forgive me," he wheezed. "Miss Jenkins's husband is supervising the construction of a special exhibit room," she said. "I think they need a good contractor to make sure they do everything Amanda wants," she continued. "He's so cute," she said, smiling at me, and then walked away. Apparently, everyone but me can see that my husband is special, I thought. "He's so cute," Smith mimicked after the woman left. "If he's so damn nice, why did he do this to me?" "Okay, you go over there and try to get any information you can out of Lil Abner," Smith said. "And I'll go and try to charm the bitches. If there's money to be made here and we can pull this thing off, we'll come out on the plus side," he said angrily. I drove up to the art gallery on the east side of town, where the exhibition was to be held in 3 days. There were a lot of cars parked outside the entrance to the gallery, with people running around looking lively. I approached the door to enter and was stopped by security. "What do you want?" "The place is closed to visitors," said a very cultured man in a strict suit. The suit was tight because the man was a giant. "I'm from the agency that Miss Anderson represents and we need some information," I said, showing my badge. "Miss Anderson is nowhere to be seen," the man said. "May I see Rafe Jenkins?" I asked. "Mr. Jenkins is very busy," said the man. "Tell him it's his wife," I said, showing my name tag again. He looked at it again, then took my badge and handed it to the other huge man, spoke to him briefly and left. The second man looked at me as if he was waiting for me to move so he could crush me. As I waited by the table, I thought about the irony of the situation. I had neglected my husband and distanced myself from him, ultimately betraying his love for me in the worst possible way. I did it because I wanted to be like Smith, and I believe that Rafe just didn't have what it took to succeed in this world. And now I had to wait, begging him to agree to meet me. After a few moments, the first giant returned, the expression on his face giving me no information. He politely handed me back my pass, smiled, and wished me a good day. As I moved toward the door, he blocked my path. "Mr. Jenkins doesn't want to be disturbed," he said. But I hissed. I got ready to start making excuses and saw the teenager pull up, get out of the car with the bags from Burger Queen and head straight for the building. Apparently Rafe had been sent to lunch. But I started again. "Have a good day, ma'am," the guard repeated more firmly through clenched teeth. As I was leaving, a car pulled up to the driveway. It was a brand new 2011 Shelby GT 500 Mustang convertible. The car was so loud that the sound of the exhaust drowned out the sound of the stereo. A petite woman jumped out of the car, dressed in a long blue sweater-like shirt with a green t-shirt underneath, pink sweatpants and purple fluffy slippers. Her face was angelic and radiant. It was Amanda. Only Amanda could dress like that in public and get away with it. "Beautiful car, Amanda," the giant said. "It's not mine," she smiled. "It's a gift for my new partner." Amanda disappeared into the building. If she saw me waving at her, she made no sign. But I was sure she saw me. This meant that Smith's conclusion was correct. He was being frozen out for some reason. I wondered why I was included in that number. At least I had information for him and an idea to talk to him about later. When I returned to the office to compare notes with Smith, he was in a terrible mood. When he saw me enter his office, he became alarmed. "So what did Joe Redneck say?" he asked. I visibly tensed when I heard him address Rafe and inwardly wondered how he addressed me when I wasn't around. "I couldn't get an appointment with him," I said quietly. "What?" Smith roared. "We pay his checks. How dare he refuse to see you? And you're his wife," he snarled. "No wonder you're so crazy about me." "What did Amanda tell you?" I asked. That bitch's assistant told me she was busy. Smith snapped back. Did you try to talk to her on the phone? I asked. The assistant who handles all her phone calls told me she wasn't available and to call her personal cell phone. Smith replied tensely. And you did too? I interjected. I don't have that number, he grinned. Apparently, due to the increased publicity generated by the hype surrounding the new material, the number has only been given to people she deems important to the show. People like Brandon who I won't call to ask for it. You've seen how it goes. Her head of security has it. Her assistant has it. Her new partner has it, Smith said. And, he snarled, your damn husband has it. Well, that brings me to my idea, I said. You have an idea? Smith asked incredulously. I figured if he thought I was such an idiot, why did he hire me? Yes, I said firmly. All artists and performers have managers and agents, right? I asked. Yes, of course, Smith replied. Who represents her new partner? I asked. I don't know, Smith replied. I could see the wheels turning in his head. He reached across the table and pulled me to him. As we sat there, he started trying to undo my top again. I pulled away as if I had another idea. It was fortunate because the door opened and Brandon walked into the office. Smith turned white when he saw Brandon. I don't think I've had the pleasure, Brandon said politely, extending his hand. Brandon Benson, this is my assistant Kathleen Jenkins, Smith replied formally. Ah, Jenkins, are you related to Mr. Rafe Jenkins? Brandon asked. He's my husband, I replied. Brandon looked at me much more closely and simply said, interesting. I suddenly had the thought that he had seen me before or knew something I didn't. Would you excuse us, Miss Jenkins? Brandon asked. If you haven't gotten your dress for tomorrow's show yet or you need to do something related to it, you can take the day off to do it, he said. I didn't realize I was going to the show, I said. Oh, yeah, you really should be there, he said. I have a feeling you'll be there one way or another, so why not look your best? He added. As I closed the door, I heard Brandon's voice change. He started yelling at Smith again. Perhaps he was only being hard on Smith because they were related. Smith was probably the black sheep of the family and they expected the best from him and were harder on him as a consequence. But his idea was a good one. I really needed to look my best if I was going to a show, especially if there was a chance that Rafe would be there. I didn't think he would be. After all, he was just the head of a team of contractors, just an employee. But maybe he'd be there working, and if he saw me dressed like that, he'd realize he still loved me. Then I can promise him that I've changed and that things will be much better between us. Rafe. Amanda, I don't want a costume. I whined. But you have to have this one, she said. I'd already learned over the past couple of days that if Amanda wants something, she gets it. That morning, I got a haircut and not at a respectable barbershop. It was at one of those frou-frou salons that serves cappuccinos and other nonsense. Although I had to admit that my hair and face looked much more presentable. Amanda hid my truck. She said I could pick it up after the show. That's how she talked me into going to the show. Now I was taking her for a ride in an amazing car. A Mustang that had to be seen to be believed. It was a midnight blue Shelby GT 500 convertible. Truth be told, I didn't miss the truck at all while driving it. Being with Amanda took my mind off all my problems with Kathy. Her attorneys were working with mine to make sure everything regarding the divorce went smoothly. She, with her artistic nature, made sure I got my revenge on Smith without running into him again and in doing so, kept me out of jail. Besides, it would have been a longer revenge that would have been much more satisfying for me. He took the most important thing to me, my marriage, and destroyed it. So we'll take what was most important to him and do the same thing. But back to the suit. Amanda, George says he never wears suits even when he meets the president, I said. Okay, Rafe Jenkins, when your band sells $50 million worth of records, you can stop wearing suits too, she said, smiling. But for now, this is your first performance as an artist and you have to make a good impression. And this costume will go perfectly with our overall impression. The blue color of the costume really accentuates the light blue of your eyes, she said, looking at me. I'm an artist? I asked. When did that happen? The other day when you set the art world on fire by finishing my paintings, she said. Why else did you think we were doing all this? She asked. I thought I was working as your chauffeur to pay you back for the ruined paintings, I said. I thought that's why you had me drive your car. Rafe Jenkins, you're awesome, she said, laughing. What's so funny? I asked. It's not my car, she said, it's yours. My car, I said, I can't afford a car like that. Your share of our first painting will more than pay for this car, she said. And if not, it will be my gift to you. Now try on your jacket. No ties, Amanda, I don't wear a tie. Kathy. Smith picked me up in his limo. He had that bored rich guy look that I thought was so cool at first. You know how it is when some people get together for the most interesting events or do the most interesting things and then dismiss them as a bad time. They act like they're too cool for this room. Seeing him up close today made me wonder what I even see in him. He's 50. He's balding. I'm stronger than him and he's boring. He doesn't care about me and he uses me as an accessory. For this, I gave up my young husband who worshipped the ground I walked on for this. The first problem arose when we got to the venue and we didn't have VIP passes. So even though we arrived early, our limo couldn't pull up to the building. There were TV people and reporters there filming and taking pictures of actors, rock stars, art critics, etc. who had VIP passes. We ended up having to walk almost 4 blocks and then come in through a side entrance. From where we were waiting to get in, the VIP entrance was visible. I saw a few people I recognized from TV, etc. I even thought I saw George Solomon, the leader and lead singer of the band Rising Rocks. That was my favorite band. He had some 6-foot 90-pound Swedish supermodel with him. I didn't get a chance to look because there was a distinct rumble and people started screaming. And then a midnight blue Mustang appeared out of nowhere. The top was down, the valet opened the doors, Amanda got out of the car and took off the beautiful blue silk scarf she wore to protect her hair. I had never been jealous of a woman before, but today I was. When I saw Amanda's companion, presumably a mysterious new partner no one knew about, alarm bells rang in my head. I only saw him in profile as he stepped out of the car and lovingly took Amanda's hand as if it were the most precious thing in the world. I realized it both from the gesture and the way he held her. She was looking into his eyes with total dedication. No one here mattered but the two of them. I was surprised when George Solomon ran up to the two of them and patted his new partner on the back and then they started mimicking hitting each other for the reporters. Unlike some people, they're clearly having a good time here, I thought, looking at Smith. These people knew how to live. Amanda's new partner probably wasn't just her partner. He hung out with rock stars and God knows who else. His hair was cut just right and his suit had a very long jacket, almost like a tailcoat. It was the same midnight blue raw silk as Amanda's dress. When we finally entered the building, I couldn't stop thinking about Amanda's man. Damn, I thought to myself, why the hell am I worrying about Amanda's man when I should be trying to find my own? Smith, I'm going to take a look around the back of the pad for a few minutes, I said. He just hummed and nodded his head. He too was looking for something or someone. I walked behind the curtains and tried to get into the VIP room, but I couldn't yet. Smith and I, as representatives of the agency, were in the VIP room for a special exhibition. But we weren't allowed in for an early preview of new work before the exhibition itself. Only beautiful and very rich people were allowed in. But I didn't care. I was tired of rich people. I rubbed one of the guards on the shoulder and asked if any of the contractors would be on site today in case of emergencies. He replied, almost everyone. He also told me that I could find them downstairs on the lower level playing cards and laughing at their boss. I wondered why they would be laughing at my husband, but it was probably a bunch of good old boys laughing at Rafe being nervous about the show. I let him down again because I was so busy worrying about my own ass that I didn't think about the fact that this was what he dreamed of. This was what he considered success. Having his own contracting business and doing important things like tonight. And I wasn't here to share it all with him. I walked downstairs and my dress elicited a few whistles and wolf cries. I smiled in spite of myself. It's always nice to be appreciated. I wondered again what Rafe would think when he saw me. I looked around but didn't see him. Hey guys, is Rafe Jenkins here? I asked. He's not among the laborers today. One of them replied. Yeah, Rafe is playing another gig. They laughed. As I left, I heard them talking about me. Damn, Rafe got all the women tonight. One of them said. And all the types, said another. That's my type. I like the promiscuous ones, said one voice. I kept walking. I returned to our section and watched as people continued to flock here. Most were looking at Amanda's paintings. They were beautiful and most of them had already been sold, though the exhibit in the other room hadn't started yet. I walked over to Smith. What happened? He snapped. You couldn't find Barney Fife? I didn't say a word, just stood there pondering. Rafe was worth 1,000 Smiths. I was just contemplating how glad I was that Rafe had kicked that asshole's ass when a voice on the intercom announced that the special show was about to begin. Everyone in attendance with tickets to the VIP event lined up at the entrance to the inner room, presented their tickets and made their way into the room. This room was decorated differently. Unlike the many paintings like in the other room, there were only 7 paintings here. These paintings were covered so we couldn't see them yet. I almost stopped breathing when I saw George Solomon sitting in the front row, which was fenced off. Apparently, even the VIP lounge had different sections. I wondered how much money a front row seat cost. The master of ceremonies began to speak. Often what separates a great artist from a merely good one, he paused. These artists have the ability to make people react and have personal feelings when they look at a painting, see a sculpture, or hear a song, he said. Such artists are very rare, he continued. I saw hundreds of camera and video camera flashes leaning in to get a better view of what was happening. The doors were slightly ajar and people outside were peering in. I know this was done on purpose because all 4 doors to the room were similarly half open. It would make those who were outside pay twice as much to be here next time, and those who were here now would have the memory of it forever. Smith seemed to stay as far away from me as his seat allowed, which was odd even for him. He usually tried his best to let the other men know we were together. Tonight, the announcer continued, we have the honor of attending a performance of the latest work of one of these extremely talented female artists who herself is at a crossroads in her career. I present to you the one and only Amanda Anderson. As Amanda's tiny figure appeared on the stage, all eyes of those gathered followed her. She approached the podium holding several cards to read. She gave the impression that she was at an awards ceremony and had many people to thank. She exuded confidence. Her every gesture had been captured in a photo and would be discussed over a mug of water around the world tomorrow. She smiled broadly, which caused another flurry of flashes, then stepped out from behind the podium so she could be photographed again from all angles. Shouts of Amanda echoed around the auditorium as everyone in attendance tried to get her attention. Today I offer you my latest and greatest work, she said in heavily accented English. I had heard Amanda speak several times before and knew that her accent wasn't usually this thick. She was obviously doing her best to portray an exotic French entertainer. Tonight I will show you a complete artistic experience that will give you a taste of raw emotion in several paintings. But before we begin the auction, I must name some of the people who have supported us and made our presence here tonight possible, she said. From Benson Management Agency, can Brandon Benson, Smith Benson, and Kathleen Jenkins take the stage? She asked. I couldn't believe Amanda had mentioned my name. I stood up as if in a daze and headed toward the podium. Smith was grinning from ear to ear. He waved to the camera and whispered to me. That bitch complimented us. Maybe it'll all work out. When we reached the stairs, Smith immediately walked up the steps and onto the stage, and Brandon bowed and gestured for me to follow him. As we got up on stage, several cameras flashed and I looked directly into the lens of a television camera. I hoped that Rafe and maybe my family back home would be able to see me. There were many televisions with huge screens all around the auditorium showing what was happening on stage. I noticed that there were a few more people on stage than Amanda had named, but it didn't bother me. They all seemed to be holding large manila envelopes. Perhaps there were going to be some kind of awards being presented there. I got into the spirit of the event and waved to no one in particular. Amanda started talking again. When I came to California 2 months ago, Smith turned pale when he heard her say, a few months ago. We thought she'd only been here a week or two. That was probably one of the reasons she resented us. I was distraught, Amanda continued. My career had stalled and I didn't know what to do next. I had done a lot of paintings in France that were sold tonight. They are good and at the time I was proud of them, but I knew I had to take the next step. But alas, I didn't know what that next step would be until the man you were about to meet came into my life. I was tingling all over at the thought of standing next to Amanda's mystery partner. The first thing he did, she said, was give me a friend. The crowd gasped anew. Then he showed me the joy of simple things and the magic of different flavors. He taught me to appreciate. What's that? Her accent was so thick I could barely understand her, but she was on point. As you say, Burger Queen, she said. I turned my head and turned to Amanda. Some people around us noticed this and Smith grabbed my arm. I backed up and I had a bad feeling that this bitch and I were about to end up on the floor. Let me introduce you to my new partner, hopefully not just in this. She smiled at the camera. Rafa Jenkins, she said. My head exploded. Smith's mouth dropped open and I nearly fainted all at the same time. Brandon nudged Smith with his elbow and pointed to a short fat woman in a shabby suit and crumpled stockings on the edge of the other side of the stage. Smith visibly paled and I swear I heard his heart race. My husband Rafe came on stage, smiling. He looked better than I'd ever seen him. His hair looked like $1 million. His uncombed beard was gone and his handsome face was smoothed out. Steel blue eyes lit up the room and it seemed like they only saw Amanda. Then I saw him give a thumbs up to George Solomon and settle down next to Amanda. He didn't even cast a fleeting glance at me. I tried to step away from the podium but I was squeezed from both sides. Rafe taught me how to add raw pain and emotion to my or our art, she said. As soon as Amanda said this, Rafe raised his hands. I noticed 2 things. As soon as Rafe raised his hands, the veils over the paintings began to slowly lift and the bedspreads on the floor began to recede. 2. As Rafe's hands came down, Amanda took his hand in hers. Smith turned to look at me and then I heard someone growl. Then I realized it was me. The crowd gasped in unison. The picture before us was both grotesque and stunning. It was powerful, it was beautiful, it was a mess and all at the same time. There was a long, almost too long silence. Then the crowd rose to its feet and began to applaud. Little tears were rolling down Amanda's face and the cameras were filming it all. I couldn't believe this shit. This was art? What a bunch of bullshit. There were still unfinished paintings of me, Smith and one of us together. There was one that looked like it depicted a Burger Queen picture and another with that frumpy little woman standing at the other end of the stage. All of them were splattered with big splotches of paint. Some were splattered with multiple colors, others with just one. I couldn't understand a damn thing. But every time I looked at them, it somehow captured my heart. Look, if you will, Amanda began, a spectacle of love gone wrong. A loving and faithful man whose whore wife cheats with a man-worm who can't kiss his ass. Amanda hissed angrily. Look also at that worm's wife. Look at her pain. Feel her grief when her love is left for the last damn time. Amanda milked the crowd's reaction. Look at the pain the simple act of betrayal causes them all. She spoke as if in pain herself. This woman was the master of the show, and she had the crowd in the palm of her hand. There were oohs and ahs all around the auditorium. Then people began to recognize us and stare angrily at Smith and me. I tried to run out of the hall again, but I was stopped. Where are you going, Kathleen? Amanda asked from the podium. We still have a lot to do and we have gifts for both of you. When she said that, I saw huge security men come forward and stand behind Smith and me to ensure we couldn't leave. Brandon looked at Smith with fire in his eyes. Asshole, Brandon began. You're fired, he said the last phrase so loudly that everyone heard him. A small, frumpy woman walked up to Smith and slapped him with such force that it echoed around the room. She reached for me but couldn't get past the giant guards. With Smith's first painting, the auction began. The starting bid was $100,000. The painting was sold for almost twice that amount. A painting of a small, frumpy woman who I realized was Smith's wife sold for $250,000. Other pictures, including 2 of mine, also sold with great success. The only picture that didn't exceed the starting price was of the Burger Queen boy. But then Amanda offered a dinner with herself and Rafe as well as a personal explanation of how the boy related to the story. And suddenly the bidding for that one skyrocketed ridiculously as well. Amanda then waved her hands again and there was silence in the room. Before we get to the finale of the evening, Amanda said, we would like to present a picture of the resistance. The lights came on and the screen showed one last picture of Rafe standing alone and suffering. Only a few intense splashes of color disrupting it. Immediately the cameras came on. A few oohs and ahs were heard. Clearly this was a masterpiece of the collection. Amanda had clearly surpassed her previous level of technique in this painting. I swear I could see her breathing and feel the pain in her eyes. When I saw this painting, I realized how much I had hurt him. I also realized that I had no chance of getting him back. Who can forgive someone who loved as much as he loved me, but treated him as badly as I did? I didn't deserve his forgiveness. Bidding for the Rafe painting started at $1 million and went for nearly $1.3 million. At the end of the bidding, some audience members stood up. They were brought back to their seats by Rafe's voice. There is another item up for auction today, he said, that even Amanda doesn't know about. I'd like you all to look at the screens in the audience, he said. A video appeared on the screen showing a room, and in the room the paintings mounted on easels were clearly visible, as if they were being worked on. Rafe entered the room and saw the paintings. You could see the pain and shock on his face as he moved his gaze from painting to painting. I knew it had to be the day he caught Smith with his hand up my dress because I recognized the look in his eyes. Rafe then grabbed an open can of paint and threw it on the canvas. You could hear him scream as he did it again and then collapsed on the floor. Amanda then walked into the room and didn't even look at the paintings, at her work. She only looked at the man in front of her and how she could ease his pain. Everyone in the room gasped as she handed him another can of paint and began to paint on the picture she had put her whole soul into. Rafe threw can after can at the painting, but she just kept handing him more and more paint until he had exhausted it. Then she sat down next to him and stroked his head. Then the video stopped and Rafe said, "This is the actual security camera footage of the creation of these paintings. This is art in itself," he said. "There is only one copy and it will not be reproduced. It would make a great addition to the collection of someone who already has one or more paintings," he continued. But it would also make a great standalone piece. The video went for $2 million to whoever bought Rafe's painting. Amanda took the podium again, and an army of little people in costume stepped up as well. "We have special gifts for special people," Amanda said. A woman with a keen eye stepped up to the podium and said, "Katie Jenkins, I was too overwhelmed by the events of the night to react. So someone pointed her out to me." She stepped toward me and held out an envelope. "You've been served," she said. Another person called Smith's name and did the same. Then my name was called again, and so on in a circle. Rafe was divorcing me on grounds of infidelity. He also sued Smith for alienation of affection that led to the breakup of our marriage. And he sued the Benson agency for failure to comply with the no fraternization clause. Smith's wife did the same thing to him and me, but she wasn't suing the firm. She was a Benson. She was part of the family. When she married Smith, he took her last name. He wasn't the real Benson. Under the terms of the divorce, he even had to revert to his original last name. Besides, she had an ironclad prenup. He would be left penniless, homeless, and unemployed. He didn't even have his own car. Rafe filed for divorce as soon as he found out about me and Smith. That was long before I even thought about it. So I won't get a penny of his auction proceeds today. I would get half of our assets that we had before he filed for divorce. I would get half of what he sold his truck for if he sold it. Or he could just give me half of its value, which would be nothing to him right now. I sat and cried, looking at the contents of the envelope and looking at picture after picture. I spent the next few weeks trying to get Rafe to talk to me. He refused. His lawyers made it clear to me that if I fought for a divorce, even though they couldn't legally do so, they would post all the photos and videos they had not only on the internet, but they would send copies of the files to everyone in my hometown, including my parents. I signed the papers. I thought I could talk to Rafe when he came to the house to get the rest of his stuff, but he never came. But I saw him and that little French housekeeper a lot, and they were on TV and in many magazines and newspapers. Rafe lived the life I had always wanted and more, only without me. I fell into a long depression and stayed in it until I ran out of money. That's when I decided to do the only thing I could do, come home. I called my father and he was cold with me on the phone. It turned out that Rafe's lawyers never needed to disclose the files. The art show was on TV all over the world. Clips of it were all over the internet. Of course, no one saw the pictures of Smith and me, but everyone knew the story. I could never show my face in public again. Rafe, staying true to himself, came home and told both of his parents the story and the reason for our divorce, so they wouldn't get over the shock before it became worldwide news. His parents loved Amanda much more than they ever loved me. Even my parents liked her. From what I heard, Amanda was pregnant. They had rented a yacht and were slowly sailing around Europe, preparing for the next big art sale. It was to be the last one because Amanda finally found what she was looking for. Unfortunately for me, it was my husband. I have to go now, my bus is here. Like I said before, women's biggest trouble is men. The good ones are hard to find and the shitty ones are always out in the open, pretending to be something they're not. Like I said, most of the time it wasn't my fault. Was it? Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next